A powerful 7.3 earthquake rocked Mexico's southern coast and felt as far away as...
Within a remarkably brief window of time, a string of disturbing events has swept across North America, leaving countless people shaken and on edge as catastrophic disasters and puzzling phenomena continue to dominate public attention. A destructive 7.3 magnitude earthquake near Guatemala sent shockwaves rippling through the Pacific region, triggering fears of structural collapse, landslides, and continued seismic unrest. Across Texas, a confirmed tornado carved a path of destruction through San Antonio, tearing trees from the earth, battering buildings, and compelling families to take refuge amid relentless rain and rising floodwaters. Meanwhile, over New Jersey, rhythmic bursts of white light repeatedly lit up the sky without any accompanying thunder or visible lightning bolt, stirring widespread speculation and public anxiety. These incidents draw to mind the words of Jesus in Luke 21:11, which foretells great earthquakes and terrifying signs appearing in the heavens. If this message has moved you to pause and reflect, please like, share, and subscribe as we explore what these developments may be pointing toward. With tremendous destructive force, the Pacific Ocean region near Guatemala has been rocked by a violent 7.3 magnitude earthquake, sending tremors tearing through the heart of Central America. Structures are shaking, glass is shattering, and terrified residents are flooding into open areas as seismic waves travel across Guatemala, Mexico, and El Salvador. The threat refuses to end with that initial jolt. Steep hillsides are fracturing and giving way, sending cascades of rock, soil, and debris crashing across roadways, while loose material continues tumbling from mountain faces. Compromised bridges, fractured walls, and structurally damaged buildings could give way entirely if powerful aftershocks return. Emergency personnel are conducting inspections of residences, roadways, and public structures, while residents remain outdoors, uncertain whether the ground will suddenly lurch beneath them again. This region sits squarely on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where massive tectonic plates grind continuously against one another, far beneath the ocean floor. That immense pressure can build silently over many years before releasing in a matter of seconds. Scientists are able to record the earthquake's magnitude and monitor aftershocks in real time, but no instrument can tell frightened families precisely when the next powerful tremor will arrive. For many believers, these images call to mind Matthew 24:7, where Jesus warned that earthquakes would strike in many different locations. No single earthquake confirms that prophecy has reached its final fulfillment. Yet these images are difficult to simply turn away from. Roads splitting open, hillsides crumbling, buildings losing their structural integrity. Entire neighborhoods are being confronted with the reality that their sense of safety can vanish without the slightest warning. Stay alert, prepare with wisdom, extend help to those in harm's way, and hold your faith steady when the very ground beneath your feet refuses to stay still. But the trembling beneath the Pacific was only one piece of a widening crisis. Far to the north, skies above San Antonio, Texas, began darkening ominously as a fierce storm system swept across the city. Rain hammered streets and rooftops, while emergency alerts urgently advised residents that a tornado had made contact with the ground in the northwest section of the city. Within minutes, an EF0 funnel descended with winds approaching 85 miles per hour, cutting through residential areas with shocking speed. Massive trees were wrenched from the soil, branches rained down onto parked vehicles, and sections of roofing and metal debris were hurled across roadways. Power lines snapped and fell, casting homes into darkness as families scrambled for the interior rooms, closets, and bathrooms that offered the most protection. Outside, the threat continued mounting as rainwater swallowed roadways, making it nearly impossible for drivers to navigate to safety. Debris choked intersections, while emergency vehicles fought to navigate through flooded streets. Residents could hear the wind hammering their walls and rattling windows, though many had no sense of how near the funnel actually passed, until the roar finally began to subside. The tornado itself was short-lived, but the danger it left behind was not. With the atmosphere still unstable and rain persisting across the area, additional storms could rapidly develop. For families standing outside beside shattered trees and damaged homes, the warning had already translated into painful reality. Across the night sky, blazing objects began hurtling toward Earth, trailing long streams of orange light that burned brightly for several seconds before dissolving into the darkness. Witnesses pulled their cars to the side of the road, stepped out of their homes, and raised their eyes skyward as additional fiery fragments streaked overhead. Some disintegrated entirely before reaching the ground, while others appeared to complete their descent. Moments afterward, distant impacts were followed by smoke rising from open stretches of land. Darkened craters scarred the earth as small fires spread through dry grass and scattered material around the landing zones. Emergency crews mobilized toward the affected areas as residents were urged to maintain a safe distance. Scientists may classify these objects as meteorites or fragments of space debris, given that most material burns away completely upon entering the atmosphere. When larger pieces do survive, however, they arrive with tremendous velocity and force, capable of causing significant damage in seconds. For many believers, the sight recalls Revelation 8, where John describes a great burning star falling from the heavens like a flaming torch. This does not confirm these impacts as the fulfillment of that passage, but the image is not easy to dismiss. Fire streaking across the sky, descending toward the earth, and permanently altering the ground below. People frequently live as though tomorrow is guaranteed. They make plans, hold on to unforgiveness, and assume life will carry on, as it always has. Yet a single object from above can upend everything without a moment's notice. The reminder is plain. Invest in today. Make peace now. Do not delay what genuinely matters. But after the fiery streaks vanished beyond the horizon, a different and deeply unsettling sight appeared above New Jersey. Thick cloud cover blanketed the night sky when a white flash suddenly illuminated entire neighborhoods. Darkness reclaimed the scene for just a few seconds. Then another section of cloud lit up again, and another burst of light followed. Residents stepped onto their porches, pulled their vehicles over, and pointed phones upward in disbelief. No lightning bolt cut across the sky, and no rolling thunder came afterward. Instead, the flashes continued at steady, rhythmic intervals, making the cloud layer look as though a giant lamp were being repeatedly switched on and off. Experts may attribute the display to lightning concealed entirely within cloud layers, an approaching distant storm, or light diffracting through atmospheric moisture. These explanations, however, do little to calm the unease felt by those who stood watching the repeated pattern unfold in eerie silence. What would your reaction be if this scene played out directly above your home? Would you see nothing more than unusual weather, or would it bring you to your knees in prayer? Joel 2:30 speaks of wonders appearing both in the heavens and upon the earth. This does not establish these lights as supernatural in origin, but it carries a meaningful reminder. Do not allow yourself to become so consumed by the pace of daily life that you stop noticing what is unfolding around you. Look upward, remain watchful, and tell us in the comments what you believe was behind those strange, rhythmic flashes. As mysterious lights played across the skies over New Jersey, heavy rainfall was quietly transforming Black Canyon into a deadly trap. Water cascaded down sheer canyon walls, saturating the soil and dislodging rocks, roots, and entire sections of earth from unstable slopes. Then, the first mudslide broke free. A dense torrent of mud, stone, and broken timber surged across a roadway, forcing vehicles to halt and reverse immediately. Minutes later, a second slide tore through another part of the canyon. A third followed in quick succession, sweeping through campsites, hiking paths, and public gathering areas. Visitors heard a deep, resonating roar bounce between the canyon walls before the ground itself began moving toward them. Campers abandoned their tents and gear where they stood. Families sprinted toward higher elevations as emergency crews flooded in to clear the area of all remaining visitors. Multiple access roads had already been buried beneath mud and fallen rock, making evacuations slower and far more perilous. Rescue teams issued urgent advisories for all people to remain well away from the canyon walls until thorough ground inspections could be completed. The danger did not lift when those 3 slides came to rest. Rain continued falling, and the slopes remained heavily saturated. Additional sections of hillside could give way without any warning whatsoever. Loose rock was still descending. Existing cracks could widen further, and another slide could seal off the last remaining escape route at any moment. As Black Canyon remained buried beneath mud and fallen debris, a separate and equally alarming collapse was unfolding beneath one of California's most iconic streets. Vehicles were moving through normal traffic along Sunset Boulevard when an aging water main deep below the pavement suddenly ruptured. Water forced itself upward through cracks in the road surface, pooled across the asphalt, and began washing soil and broken material into the surrounding street. Beneath the surface, the ruptured pipe was rapidly excavating the very soil that held the road in place. Drivers above could see the flooding spreading across the lanes, but no one could detect the growing void, silently expanding beneath their wheels. Then the pavement gave way. A wide section of Sunset Boulevard dropped into a gaping hole. Asphalt fractured and separated. Painted lane markings disappeared from view, and water poured relentlessly through the broken earth. Vehicles came to an abrupt stop just short of the crater's edge as police rushed to seal the roadway and push onlookers back to safety. Residents and business owners watched in stunned disbelief as a street they had driven every single day vanished before their eyes in a matter of minutes. Emergency crews encircled the sinkhole, halted all traffic, and launched immediate inspections of surrounding pipes, sidewalks, and adjacent structures. Engineers raised urgent concerns that the visible crater might represent only a fraction of the actual damage. If escaping water had stripped away soil elsewhere beneath the surface, additional hollow spaces could be lurking beneath pavement that still appeared completely solid. Another section could collapse without warning under the weight of a passing vehicle or rescue unit, giving no one above any time to react. The scene calls to mind Matthew 7:25, in which Jesus describes a home that withstands rain and floods because its foundation was built upon solid rock. Sunset Boulevard offers a powerful illustration of why foundations are everything. A surface can appear perfectly intact, while everything beneath it is being quietly hollowed out. The same principle applies to a life, a family, or an entire nation. Concealed damage expands when it goes unaddressed. Whatever is structurally weak below the surface must be repaired before the accumulated pressure becomes too overwhelming and the collapse finally arrives. But the danger is not confined to crumbling roads or collapsing canyon walls. Across many communities, wild animals are venturing with increasing frequency into residential streets, school zones, busy highways, and densely populated neighborhoods. People are reporting animals prowling through yards in broad daylight, rummaging through garbage, crossing traffic lanes, and approaching fenced properties with a boldness rarely seen before. Some animals appear disoriented or exhausted. Others grow defensive and aggressive the moment a person draws near. Pets are being pursued, motorists are slamming their brakes, and families are being cautioned to keep children inside whenever aggressive wildlife is reported in the area. A range of pressures may be pushing these animals out of their natural territories. Prolonged heat waves can drain rivers and eliminate small water sources. Wildfires can obliterate entire ecosystems of shelter. Construction can strip away critical feeding grounds. Meanwhile, hunger and illness can fundamentally alter the behavioral patterns that would ordinarily keep animals far from human activity. A creature that once remained deep in dense forest may now wander into a residential neighborhood because the habitat it depended on no longer exists. That reality demands that these encounters never be treated as entertainment or curiosity. A frightened or diseased animal is capable of attacking without any warning. One person attempting to capture close-up footage, one child taking a curious step forward, or one family pet left unattended in the yard can transform an unusual sighting into a genuine emergency within seconds. Romans 8:22 reminds us that all of creation has been groaning as though in the labor pains of childbirth. That passage makes clear that the suffering visible in the natural world is directly tied to the brokenness of humanity. Creation belongs to God, not to us. We were placed on this earth as its caretakers, not as its exploiters. When forests are destroyed, water sources are contaminated, and animal habitats are eliminated for human convenience or profit, the consequences do not simply disappear. They return through hunger, displacement, spreading disease, and fear. These events should draw us toward repentance, a renewed sense of responsibility, and earnest prayer. Honor what God has created, protect those rendered vulnerable, and never forget that disregarding His established order ultimately brings the consequences back directly to our own homes. The restlessness seen throughout the natural world today brings us back to two pivotal moments in Scripture when the earth itself served as an instrument of God's direct communication. One event exposed rebellion in its most naked form. The other unveiled God's law before an entire nation. In both scenes, the ground shook violently. People were overcome with trembling, and no one could maintain the illusion that God's authority was remote or indifferent. The first account is set in the wilderness. Moses had been appointed to lead Israel out of slavery, and Aaron had been designated to serve in the priestly role. Yet not everyone was willing to accept the positions God had assigned. Korah, a Levite, assembled Dathan, Abiram, and a collection of respected community leaders. They did not come to Moses seeking dialogue or understanding. They positioned themselves in direct confrontation, charging him with seizing authority that did not belong to him. Their words carried the ring of boldness, but beneath the surface lay pure pride. Korah coveted a position that God had never granted him, and he persuaded others that rebellion was an act of righteous courage. Families stood at the entrances of their tents, watching as community leaders chose their sides. What had begun inside the heart of one man was now fracturing an entire people. Moses did not respond with retaliation or self-defense. He fell face down before God, understanding that this accusation was not merely a personal attack. Korah was rejecting the very structure God had put into place. Moses instructed Korah and his followers to present themselves before the Lord the following morning, each carrying a censer filled with incense. By morning, hundreds had gathered at the entrance of the tabernacle. Smoke curled up from the censers. The rebels stood as a unified group. The wider community assembled nearby, waiting in tense anticipation to see whom God would honor. Then the glory of the Lord appeared visibly. God directed Moses and Aaron to move away from the assembly immediately. Moses interceded, pleading that the entire nation should not bear the consequence for the sin of a small group of men. He then turned and walked toward the tents of Dathan and Abiram, calling out an urgent warning for all bystanders to move away from the area. Families stepped back. Neighbors cleared the space. No one could anticipate what was about to unfold, but the urgency in Moses' voice left no room for hesitation. Moses declared plainly, "If these men died an ordinary death, the people would have cause to doubt his calling. But if the ground split open and consumed them, the entire assembly would understand that these men had treated the Lord with open contempt." Before those words had fully dissolved into the air, the earth tore apart beneath them. The ground opened wide, swallowing the tents of the rebels, their households, and everything associated with them. Then the earth sealed shut again. A wave of screaming swept through the camp as people fled in every direction, terrified that the ground might open beneath their own feet as well. The place that had appeared completely solid only moments earlier had become the very mechanism through which every false sense of security was stripped away. Korah had calculated that strength in numbers would shield him. He had influential allies standing beside him, loyal supporters at his back, and unwavering confidence in his cause. Yet the crowd around him could not alter what God had commanded. Popular consensus could not transform rebellion into righteousness. The ground beneath their feet laid bare how genuinely fragile their security had always been. Korah sought honor without obedience and influence without submission. His destruction stands as a permanent warning against pride that rejects correction and draws others into rebellion alongside it. Yet the Bible also preserves a second scene of shaking, one that carried an entirely different purpose. At Mount Sinai, Israel had crossed out of the bondage of Egypt and now stood at the base of a sacred mountain. God was preparing to make his covenant known to his people in the most direct and unforgettable way. This time, the trembling was not meant to remove rebels from among the living. It came as an entire nation stood in the presence of the holiness of God. The people were given instructions to consecrate themselves in advance. They laundered their clothing and waited in anticipation. Boundaries were established around the base of the mountain, and no one was permitted to approach carelessly or presumptuously. God was on the verge of speaking, and that reality required deliberate preparation. On the third morning, thunder shook the sky. Lightning cracked through thick clouds that had enveloped the mountain. A trumpet blast began to grow louder and louder until every person standing in the camp trembled with reverential fear. Moses led the people forward to meet with God. Mount Sinai was blanketed in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. Smoke billowed upward like the plumes of a great furnace. The mountain shook violently from its base to its peak. Israel had already witnessed the sea torn open before them, and food supplied miraculously in the desert. But standing at the foot of a mountain burning with the presence of God was something of an entirely different magnitude. Parents pulled their children close as thousands gazed upward through the thickening smoke. Then God spoke. The commandments he delivered touched every dimension of human life. He declared that no other gods were to be worshipped. No idols were to be fashioned or bowed before. His name was not to be treated carelessly or used to deceive. Murder was forbidden. Adultery was forbidden. Theft and dishonesty were forbidden. Coveting what belonged to a neighbor was forbidden. Parents were to be honored, and a day dedicated to worship and rest was to be faithfully observed. These commands revealed that God cared deeply about the nature of worship, the health of family life, the integrity of truth, the demands of justice, the fidelity of relationships, and even the motivations harbored silently within the human heart. His law was given to shape a people rescued from generations of slavery, who now needed to learn what it meant to live in genuine freedom. The people retreated to a distance and implored Moses to serve as their mediator, for they could not bear to hear God's voice directly and survive. Moses responded by urging them not to flee from God in terror, but to carry a holy reverence for the Lord that would act as a guard over their conduct and protect them from choosing sin. The trembling of Sinai was never intended to generate blind panic. It was designed to awaken obedience and draw a nation into covenant relationship with the God who had rescued them. Korah and Sinai present two dramatically different postures toward God's authority. Korah heard God's established order and chose defiance. Moses heard God's call and ascended the mountain to receive his words. One man assembled a crowd around his personal pride. The other walked into the fire and smoke to listen. In one account, the earth split open because people refused to turn from their rebellion. In the other, the mountain trembled because God was drawing his people into a sacred and lasting covenant. The question these stories force us to confront is this: how do we personally respond when God corrects us, warns us, or calls us to walk in obedience? Do we dig into our pride the way Korah did? Or do we listen with the posture of Moses? Do we surround ourselves with voices that simply confirm what we already want to hear? Or do we honestly examine whether our lives are aligned with what God has declared? The ground may feel perfectly stable beneath your feet today, but no human confidence is stronger than the one who spoke it into existence. When God speaks, wisdom does not argue back from a place of pride. Wisdom listens, turns back, and chooses obedience before a warning has the opportunity to become judgment. The warning issued through Korah and Mount Sinai extended far beyond the fate of individual people. Scripture also reveals that entire empires can rise to breathtaking power, appear completely unassailable, and still crumble when the foundations on which they were built become compromised. In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar receives a troubling dream featuring a colossal statue of terrifying proportions. Its head is crafted from pure gold, its chest and arms fashioned from silver, its midsection formed of bronze, its legs cast in iron, and its feet composed of a brittle mixture of iron and clay. The statue is imposing, commanding, and awe-inspiring. Viewed from a distance, it appears capable of standing unchallenged for eternity. But its most vulnerable point is located not at the top, where power is most visible, but at the very bottom. The feet are divided and unstable. The iron suggests formidable strength, while the clay introduces inherent fragility. The two materials resist bonding together effectively. Then a stone, not quarried or shaped by any human hand, strikes the statue directly at its feet. The entire structure disintegrates on impact. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay are shattered together and scattered like dust before the wind. Daniel interprets the statue as representing a succession of great kingdoms that rise and pass from the earth, one after another. Each empire is fully convinced that its dominance will prove permanent. Each commands armies, controls vast territory, accumulates staggering wealth, and exercises authority over countless people. Yet not one of them endures. Babylon falls. The powers that replace it eventually decline as well. Human authority changes hands repeatedly, but it never achieves permanence. This vision ought to cause every nation to pause for serious reflection, including America. The United States possesses formidable military capability, cutting-edge technology, extraordinary wealth, and far-reaching global influence. Its cities, corporations, universities, and institutions shape the lives of many millions of people. From the outside, that accumulation of power can appear entirely unshakable. But Daniel's vision issues a clear warning. Outward strength can conceal hidden weakness below the surface. A nation can possess the world's most advanced military arsenal and still be hollowed out by internal hatred. It can erect ever taller skylines, while the bonds of trust between its citizens silently erode. It can generate unprecedented wealth, while injustice quietly spreads into every corner. It can lead the world in technological innovation, while families fracture beyond recognition. Truth becomes increasingly elusive, and pride gradually displaces humility in public life. No foreign adversary may be capable of defeating such a nation swiftly or directly. But division can corrode it from the inside. Corruption can undermine its institutions over time. Injustice can give rise to deep and lasting anger. Moral decay can strip people of the very values that once held their communities together. Daniel does not call us to calculate the precise date an empire will collapse. His message is that no human kingdom should ever confuse temporary power with permanent security. Nations endure longer when their leaders pursue justice, when their citizens prize truth, and when the people remember that all earthly authority ultimately answers to God. America is not exempt from the lesson that brought Babylon to its knees. Wealth cannot rescue a nation that has abandoned wisdom. Technology cannot mend the wounds left by deep social division. Military power cannot restore a conscience that has been thoroughly broken. The question is not simply how strong a nation appears on the surface today, but what is actually holding it together underneath. If pride, injustice, and division are permitted to deepen, the damage may remain concealed for a season. But as Daniel's statue makes unmistakably clear, when the foundation gives way, everything that has been built above it falls along with it. The call is to renounce pride, champion justice, restore truth, and return to God before internal fractures become the breaking point at which national strength finally gives way entirely. The final message here is not a call to panic. It is an invitation to awaken before another warning becomes necessary. Every event examined in this message may carry a perfectly natural explanation. Earthquakes arise from movement in the tectonic plates deep beneath the surface. Storms develop through shifts in atmospheric pressure and temperature. Sinkholes form when underground water erodes the soil that supports pavement above. Strange lights in the sky may originate from electrical weather phenomena, atmospheric conditions, or light refracting through moisture. These explanations deserve to be taken seriously, because truth should never be surrendered to fear. But understanding the natural mechanism behind an event does not settle the more important question of how we ought to live in response to it. Human life is fragile, in ways we rarely admit. Plans can be overturned by a single phone call. An ordinary morning can spiral into a full emergency before noon. A family may go on assuming that there will always be more time to speak, to forgive, to make things right, to return to God. But time is not something any of us own. It is a gift, extended one moment at a time, and no one holds authority over how much of it remains. That is precisely why fear must not be our dominant response. Fear renders people erratic, suspicious, and dangerously susceptible to manipulation. It causes them to accept every rumor as fact, to spread misinformation without hesitation, and to interpret every unusual event as confirmation of imminent catastrophe. Faith does not call for panic. Faith calls for honesty, for courage, and for readiness. At the same time, indifference carries its own serious danger. Some people witness suffering and simply scroll past it without a second thought. Others hear clear warnings and assume, without examination, that those warnings apply to someone else entirely. They put off every significant decision indefinitely because life still feels manageable and ordinary. But a heart that repeatedly ignores every reminder can gradually lose its very capacity to respond when it genuinely matters. Now is the time to revisit what has been delayed. Pray while your mind is clear and undistracted, not only when crisis has stripped away every other option. Repent while the opportunity to change direction still lies open before you. Forgive the person whose name still stirs something bitter and unresolved inside you. Reach out to the family member you have been quietly avoiding. Extend help to someone who has nothing to offer you in return. Look in on the elderly, the isolated, and those carrying hardship without anyone knowing. Stockpile emergency supplies. Familiarize yourself with evacuation routes, and take seriously the warnings issued in dangerous situations. Preparation is not evidence of weak faith. It is one practical expression of responsible stewardship over the life God has entrusted to you and over the people He has placed in your care. The world does not need more voices amplifying fear. It needs people who remain steady under pressure, who speak truthfully, who extend genuine help, and who refuse to abandon those around them when conditions become genuinely difficult. It needs believers whose faith is made visible through patience, mercy, integrity, and selfless service. Do not exhaust your days trying to calculate the exact hour of what is to come. Invest the time you have been given. Live in such a way that fewer words are left unspoken, fewer wounds are left untreated, and fewer people are left without someone willing to stand beside them. Stay watchful, but guard your hope. Stay prepared, but resist being consumed by anxiety. Keep your heart close to God, your hands open to serve, and your life positioned to answer whenever He calls. If this message has stirred something in you, please like the video, share your thoughts or a prayer in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being here, and may God watch over you and everyone you love. Those without shelter face the gravest risk of all, because heat stroke can overtake the body with stunning speed once its ability to regulate temperature collapses. Scientists point to a combination of entrenched high-pressure systems, saturating humidity, and heat retained in urban concrete long after the sun goes down. Even the overnight hours delivered scant relief, denying millions of people the recovery time they desperately needed before the next dangerous day began again. Yet for many believers, that suffocating atmospheric pressure carried a weightier significance. Human endurance has its limits. Comfort can be stripped away far more quickly than people expect. A nation that prides itself on its strength can still be brought low by the sky above it. And as America struggled beneath that relentless heat, the question pressing on many hearts was this: is this simply extreme weather, or is it a reminder that humanity is far more fragile and vulnerable than it cares to acknowledge? But the heat turned out to be merely the opening movement. After days lived under that suffocating weight, the sky transformed without mercy or transition. What had been blazing, bright, and unbearable suddenly turned dark, violent, and crackling with danger. Cloud formations gathered at startling speed across multiple states. Tornado warnings were broadcast as families who had just been sheltering from scorching heat were now scrambling to shelter from a different and far more immediate threat. Across Oklahoma and Kansas, the atmosphere became charged, volatile, and deeply threatening. Near Chicago, ferocious winds tore through neighborhoods with terrifying velocity. Trees snapped like brittle twigs and crashed down across rooftops. Heavy limbs slammed into parked vehicles with shattering force. Power lines whipped to the ground and plunged entire blocks into complete darkness. What had initially appeared to be a typical summer thunderstorm mutated rapidly into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. Some who witnessed it said the wind carried the unmistakable roar of a freight train tearing directly through the neighborhood. That sound alone sent people sprinting toward basement stairs, convinced a tornado was descending above them. The atmosphere vibrated with an unsettling energy. Windows trembled in their frames. Rain and hail pounded surfaces without relenting, as the sky above appeared to churn and twist with violent intent. Meteorologists may attribute all of this to colliding air masses, warm, moisture-laden air rising sharply from the heated ground, encountering colder air moving in above it, generating severe thunderstorms, destructive winds, large hail, and the precise atmospheric conditions capable of spinning up tornadoes. But for many people watching these events play out in rapid succession, the timing felt deeply and unmistakably sobering. First, the land scorched under extreme and relentless heat. Then the sky erupted with wind, rain, and furious storm. And the question that could not be silenced was this: when the ground grows hotter and the heavens grow restless, is humanity being called to wake up in a world that feels more unstable with each passing season? This time, the sign arrived not in the form of howling wind, pelting hail, or streets turned to rivers. It came in complete silence. In a quiet residential neighborhood, onlookers glanced toward a local church and stopped entirely where they stood. A remarkable golden beam of light appeared to descend directly down upon the building, cutting through the overcast sky like a narrow, luminous corridor from somewhere far above. The light was warm, brilliantly focused, and strikingly concentrated, bathing the church roof in a glow, while the surrounding darkness seemed to pull back from it. There was no sound. The ground did not move beneath anyone's feet. Yet the very stillness of the moment seemed to amplify its power rather than diminish it. Several witnesses described the golden radiance as producing a warmth that was felt not merely in the air, but somewhere much deeper, within the chest, within the heart. People raised their phones and began capturing footage. Some stood completely motionless, unable to fully process what their eyes were seeing. Others lowered their heads and quietly began to pray.